Welcome Chosen X. You awaken to a subtle rearrangement in the air, a fine alteration that makes familiar rooms feel newly arranged and familiar voices seem to carry unspoken layers. At first the change is a gentle pressure behind the eyes, an impression like distant thunder, then it draws closer and reveals itself as an interior logic that insists on being noticed. You do not invent these sensations. They arrive with the authority of a weather system that has run its course beneath ordinary perception. You learn quickly how to separate the urge to explain from the need to receive. Movement proceeds inward before it becomes visible. Your steps grow deliberate not because you decide so but because the ground seems to set a tempo for you. Ordinary tasks acquire a slow clarity. The way light rests on a countertop reads like a message when you have trained yourself to attend. You begin to record small alignments in a private ledger, learning to trust sequence even when explanation is absent. People shift around you without announcing the reason. Some faces soften and lean in as though they can sense an untold confidence. Others withdraw as if proximity requires them to examine truths they have long avoided. The world does not punish your emergence, but it does recalibrate itself. You notice how conversations tilt, how pauses lengthen, how a door opens at the exact moment a thought blooms. These synchronies are neither random nor theatrical. They are the language of a field-making room. Sleep changes shape. Dreams braid instruction into image, teaching you to recognize motifs rather than offering tidy stories. You wake with residues of purpose as though a teacher spoke in a coding you will unravel through practice. Some nocturnal scenes feel like rehearsals for choices that have not yet presented themselves. You learn to pay attention to gestures and to the way certain symbols recur, trusting that repetition signals curriculum rather than coincidence. Solitude becomes necessary and tender. It is not a punishment but a laboratory where you test how long your attention can hold a single tone. In those quiet hours you practice listening until the margins of thought relax and something beneath them can be heard. These sessions are not dramatic. They are simple protocols for refinement, moments of stillness, measured breathing, and the quick notation of impressions before reasoning arrives to complicate them. As your sensitivity increases, ordinary comforts seem inadequate. Shallow company scratches at your edges and flattens your appetite for subtlety. You prefer fewer exchanges that contain more depth, selecting presence over constant social motion. People who once matched your rhythm become mismatched with where you are headed. Their departures are not failures but necessary pruning to keep your field intact. Signals intensify in certain places. Water reflects not only light but a pattern that can be read as counsel. Echoes in narrow halls return phrases that carry emphasis the first time you hear them. A particular chord in a piece of music will settle into your bones like a key. These cues accumulate into a private grammar that lets you orient yourself when maps fail. The world offers signposts if you remember how to look for them. You notice a tightening and then a release in your chest when you tell the truth to yourself. Confessions spoken in solitude feel lighter than the secrets you carried when you performed for approval. Naming becomes a ritual that clarifies intent and prevents drift. You begin to treat honesty not as a moral demand but as a navigational practice, a way to align choices with the interior logic emerging inside you. Pressure will come disguised as opportunity. Invitations promising ease may surface precisely when the work of patience is required. Learn to test offers by whether they feed depth or only appearance. A bright window that merely reflects vanity will close quickly, while a narrow gate that forces practice opens into a room of consequence. Choose according to whether a path deepens capacity or merely accumulates acknowledgement. You are learning to steward influence without spectacle. When you enter a room and conversations bend toward clarity, your task is not to dominate but to hold steadiness that invites others to meet themselves. Presence should create space for truth rather than inflict it. Practice restraint as a form of generosity. Allow people to arrive at insight through their own time while you maintain an unmoving center. Over days small confirmations arrive. A phrase you carry becomes visible in a passing text. A stranger offers a fragment of advice that aligns uncannily with an image from your dream. Patterns begin to braid together until the edges of coincidence fray. These confirmations are quiet and cumulative. They do not shout, but they accumulate into a conviction that something reliable underwrites the new logic you are learning. Curiosity will serve you because it allows you to stay open without becoming credulous. Inquiry is a discipline when paired with boundary and discernment. Ask questions that attune you to motive and pattern rather than seeking immediate resolution. Let wonder accompany work and let skepticism be a guardrail, not a cage. As this part of your passage closes, you stand at a small threshold. The alteration in your perception has taken root. It has been tested in the ordinary world and found to persist. You have learned the privacy of practice and the courage it takes to preserve attention. Ahead lie deeper calibrations and larger consequences, but for now honor the quiet progress. Rest is not retreat. It is preparation. Keep tending the small rituals that preserve clarity and let the sequence continue to unfold. You move into a phase where perception thickens and small particulars begin to assemble into coherent direction. Familiar scenes acquire straight-of meaning so that a street light, a voice, or the angle of a cup can contain instruction. The skill is practiced observation, naming textures of speech, tracking how light rests on a face, noting rhythms that repeat across days. In quiet, you learn to separate useful patterns from merely flattering noise. This stage carries a gravity that sits low in the chest and asks for endurance more than show. The energy that arrives is not only bright, it is dense and requires daily discipline. Sleep becomes a rehearsal where images are not random but coded tasks. You learn to wake with notes, to annotate the residue of night, and to convert dream gestures into experiments during waking hours. Attention becomes a craft rather than a mood. Those near you respond in ways that reveal their own interior economics. Some are startled into candor and produce speech with a bluntness that can feel like offering. Others shrink, their politeness splintering when exposed to a presence that refuses performance. A few approach with a steadiness that invites reciprocal work. Your influence functions like a filter. It does not determine outcomes so much as clarify what is already trying to happen. You will find symbolic language settling into a private lexicon. Images recur with insistence and acquire specific valences in your life. Water might indicate transition when it returns at dawn, while a particular bird could mark decisive choice. The meaning is personal and emergent. Rules are generated through repetition and testing. Learn to catalog rather than to fixate because the significance of a motif emerges through context. Solitude in this period is not exile. It is a laboratory for translation. You refine fragments into practice by taking tiny actions that test hypotheses, a conversation that asks one honest question, a walk that checks a hunch, a short ritual that checks whether an image produces consequence. These small trials protect the density you carry from scattering into vanity. You will meet proposals that pretend to align with your growth but demand unsustainable bandwidth. Assess offers by whether they ask you to build habit or to perform spectacle. Does a path cultivate restoration, or does it convert your attention into formatting for others? Your capacity expands through repeated, ordinary practices. Conserve attention through selection and through routines that preserve clarity. The ethics of this phase are granular. Fidelity to small agreements matters more than dramatic declarations. Make compact covenants with yourself. Times for rest, windows for deep work, parameters for sharing insight. These commitments create scaffolding that prevents your influence from diffusing into ramped expectations. Translation is essential. Much of what you receive arrives as an image or effect and must be rendered to be useful. Begin with modest forms, a line of text, a sketch, a brief experiment. Treat each translation as a prototype to be tested against outcomes. When forms fail, refine them. When they succeed, document the conditions that supported the result. Encounter resistance with patience and evidence. Structures built to preserve predictability will not always welcome novelty. Respond with clarity, gather small confirmations, keep records, and build a track record so that intuition is accompanied by measurable practice. Evidence converts skepticism into engagement. A network of reciprocal companions will form. These are not followers but fellow practitioners who exchange accountability and craft. Choose them with care because they will shape both the tone and the reach of what you build. Their presence allows you to scale practice without losing fidelity to the interior grammar you steward. Toward the close of this stage, you will notice increasing alignment between inner movement and external circumstance. Events will begin to arrange themselves with a precision that feels taught rather than accidental. This harmonization is partial and requires continued maintenance. Preserve the practices that produced it and ready your attention for broader work. The pulse you carry is steadying into rhythm, and with that rhythm comes a responsibility to translate, to test, and to expand with care. Emotionally, this phase is exacting. You will feel tugged between mercy and boundary, between the instinct to rescue and the need to preserve field integrity. Allow tenderness to inform firmness. Keep learning to let people meet consequences while offering clarity that reduces needless harm. These tensions are the practice arena for larger integrity. As you close this chapter, honor the small wins, tend the companions who sharpen you, and carry forward the humility that keeps influence sustainable. Remain curious, protect attention, and test small truths until they form a pattern. Okay. You stand at the center of a narrowing that feels both like a wound and a forge. Days that once blurred together now carry a cadence you can measure by breath. Tasks take on the weight of ritual. When you speak, the air around certain syllables shifts, not because you add force but because your words land on seams others avoid. There is a loneliness in being a seam, a quality that will test tenderness and resolve in equal measure. You are learning to move through that loneliness without mistaking it for failure. People who remain near you reveal their true orientation. Some draw close because your steadiness helps them stand straighter. Others retreat to protect narratives they have built against shame or loss. These departures are neither harms nor endorsements, they are practical reckonings. You will mourn certain exits with a quiet grief while also understanding the necessity of clearing room. Loss is a tool in this season and must be honored as such. Rituals take on new specificity. Simple sequences anchor you, a deliberate breathing pattern before engagement, a brief note taken after a revealing conversation, the placement of a stone on a windowsill to remind you of commitment. These actions are small and precise because the field you occupy magnifies habit into structure. Over time, these repetitions create a form of armor that is porous enough to remain humane yet resilient enough to hold capacity. You will feel pressure to perform generosity without limits. Resist that pressure. Boundaries are not indifference. They are the architecture that allows compassion to be steady rather than depleting. Offer your attention in measures that sustain you. Watch how your presence becomes a container for others only when you have first learned to contain yourself. Dream work continues and becomes more articulate. Night narratives deliver modular fragments you can test during daylight. A symbol arriving in two separate dreams should be treated like a query that needs an experiment. When a tone repeats in auditory dreams, play that tone in waking hours and observe responses. Translation is iterative. Expect error. Refine. The process of converting nocturnal material into lived practice is a discipline of patience more than certainty. In public spheres you begin to encounter institutional resistance. Rules designed for sameness are not malice, they are defense mechanisms to maintain coherence. Work within procedures while bringing incremental change. Documentation matters. When intuition leads to action, map the steps and note outcomes. Over time, this record builds credibility and transforms suspicion into partnership. You will practice the delicate art of revealing. Not every insight demands broadcast. Some truths are instruments that must be tuned privately, then offered in calibrated doses. Ask whether disclosure will cultivate growth or simply satisfy curiosity. When you teach, make the lesson small enough to digest and practical enough to test. Tiny practices accumulate into durable transformation. There are tests of belonging. Groups formed around entertainment or spectacle will not contain you well. Look instead for communities oriented to craft, to the steady work of making life intelligible. These are not always visible or popular, but they sustain excavation and reflection. Invest in companions who ask for your presence and offer the same steadiness in return. You will meet people whose lifelines intersect yours briefly and then separate. Treat these encounters as purposeful lessons rather than disappointments. Each short alignment refines discernment about timing and reciprocity. Some connections will be catalytic and require no maintenance beyond gratitude. Others will demand careful tending and mutual upkeep. Learn to allocate attention according to reciprocal effort rather than sentimental loyalty. Practical care is essential. Eat, sleep, and move with the respect a long campaign requires. Neglecting physical needs creates crashes that feel like spiritual failure, though they are logistical. Steward your body as the instrument through which sustained work is accomplished. Small routines of hygiene, consistent rest, and movement keep perception sharp and heart steady. You will want certainty in decision-making. Instead, cultivate a method, gather small tests, iterate quickly, assess outcomes, and repeat. This pragmatic loop turns faith into practice and reduces the cost of error. When choices ripple outward, a compact experiment reveals likely consequences and protects against overextension. When others project onto you, hold a firm center. Their projections are data, not identity. Listen for what their responses reveal about their own wounds rather than assuming responsibility for their discomfort. Maintain clear protocols for engagement so that compassion does not become a dissolving of boundaries. Your language becomes a tool for navigation. Use verbs that create motion and nouns that hold limits. Speak in clear sentences with modest claims and concrete invitations to act. Avoid poetic obfuscation when practical outcomes are at stake. The aesthetic has its season and so does repair. In moments of rupture, allow space for grief and learning. Do not rush to alchemize pain into meaning before the feeling has been fully inhabited. Sensation and thought collaborate when time is permitted. Hold both with gentleness and refusal to flatten complexity into easy narratives. As this chapter folds, you will notice a subtle hardening in how you judge proposals and relationships. This is refinement, not cynicism. The work ahead requires structures capable of holding scale and nuance. Practice saying no without apology and yes with intention. Continue to journal small confirmations. Record coincidences, practical results from dream experiments, and the timing of synchronies. Over months, these notes will form a map that shows how subtle agency accrues to manifest change. Treat the ledger as a tool of accountability rather than vanity. Prepare for intensified alignment ahead. The rhythms you have cultivated will be tested by expanding influence. Remain devoted to the crafts of restraint, translation, and incremental rigor. The next phase will require you to hold greater visibility with steadiness that does not collapse into performance. Continue with compassion, and keep the work honest. You enter a realm where your earlier certainty ripens into something more deliberate. The air around you feels charged with a patient voltage, and every choice you make echoes through corridors that appear only when you walk toward them. This stage demands steadiness. You are no longer learning how to sense hidden movements. You are learning how to guide them with precision. You begin by refining the shape of your intentions. Each thought becomes a tool that sculpts your surroundings. When you speak, you adjust pressure in the atmosphere. When you hesitate, you bend the rhythm of unfolding events. This is not a theatrical influence. It is the disciplined coordination of awareness and action. You learn that true power refuses spectacle. It prefers quiet accuracy. People around you shift in subtle ways as your presence sharpens. Some sense stability in you and draw closer with an instinctive trust they cannot explain. Others retreat because your clarity dislodges the comfortable illusions they have carried for years. You do not push them away and you do not chase them. You simply witness what their movement reveals. Each reaction teaches you something about the delicate architecture of human longing. You begin developing the discipline of layered observation. You read the surface of conversations while tracking the currents beneath them. Silence becomes an ally. You sense the difference between a pause that invites and a pause that warns. You learn to enter a room without disturbing the fragile equilibrium that keeps fragile hearts intact. You build structures that allow your work to extend beyond a single moment. Documents become vessels that carry intention into the future. Small gatherings become laboratories where you study how people adopt new patterns of attention. You reshape processes not by force but by introducing clarity into spaces that had been operating on outdated assumptions. Systems respond to steady truth more readily than to pressure. Ritual stabilizes your expanding influence. Each morning you return to the practice that anchors your mind. Each night you review the sequence of the day with a calm detachment that reveals where your voice carried weight and where you misplaced your focus. These small routines accumulate into resilience. They keep you from drifting into arrogance and they keep you from collapsing under responsibility. Loss appears again not as punishment but as calibration. Relationships that once felt essential begin to dissolve because they cannot withstand the scale of attention you now hold. You honor them without mourning their departure. Change requires vacancy. Vacancy creates space for alignments that match the gravity of your path. Your communication shifts. You choose language that carries intention without sharpness. You avoid wasteful explanations and instead speak in ways that encourage others to uncover their own clarity. When they succeed, you step back. When they stumble, you offer direction without taking their agency. Guidance becomes collaboration rather than control. You begin to understand the weight of continuity. Influence that endures must be supported by people who share devotion to craft. You train them without declaring superiority. You teach through demonstration, offering methods that can be tested, refined, and eventually mastered without reliance on you. Your aim is not to create followers. Your aim is to cultivate partners in responsibility. As your reach expands, you recognize the need to protect your inner equilibrium. Attention becomes currency and you spend it wisely. You design your environment so it nurtures concentration and shields you from noise that fractures intention. This design is not decoration. It is infrastructure for sustained clarity. Pressure increases in moments when multiple demands converge. Instead of collapsing, you focus on what remains essential. Your practice has prepared you for this. You assess without panic. You communicate without haste. You move with the calm certainty of someone who has rehearsed consequences long before they arrive. This steadiness becomes a silent anchor for those who look to you when instability threatens balance. Humility becomes the foundation that prevents your presence from becoming distorted. You remain a student even as you guide others. Curiosity keeps you honest. Wonder keeps you generous. You listen to voices that challenge you because they sharpen the accuracy of your purpose. As this stage approaches its threshold, you feel a new coherence forming inside you. It is not confidence in the superficial sense. It is a deep alignment between intention and effect. The next transition will demand visibility that is greater than anything you have faced. It will call you to carry responsibility with a steady heart and an unshakable clarity. You are nearly prepared. Stand in this moment with patience. Let the architecture of your inner world settle into its new shape. The path ahead will require its full strength. You stand at a hinge where private practice becomes public responsibility, and the atmosphere around you carries a readiness that matches your own. Your preparation has been exacting and quiet, and now demand appears without fanfare. Visibility will not be an accident, it arrives because the conditions you cultivated finally attract attention. When you move forward, do so with the composure of someone who has rehearsed nuance and consequence in the solitude of disciplined work. This final passage asks that you consolidate what you have learned into forms that can hold consequence. Intimacy with subtle sources must be translated into structures that yield reliable results. A vision untested remains a private truth, a practice tested becomes a resource for others. You are invited to turn internal clarity into methods, to codify ritual into repeatable steps, and to build containers that protect honesty while allowing expansion. As your circle grows, the decisions you make ripple outward with greater force. Choices about staffing, partnership, and public framing will no longer be merely administrative. They will be ethical acts that shape how your influence functions in the world. Select collaborators who share commitment to craft rather than appetite for applause. Create agreements that favor accountability, clarity, and the slow work of maturation. You will face moments where short-term metrics tempt you to prioritize exposure over efficacy. Resist that temptation by holding a standard that rewards depth over speed. When you encounter offers that promise rapid scale, assess whether those paths preserve the integrity of the work or convert it into a spectacle. The measure of success here is not an increase in attention but the endurance of positive transformation. Communities you touch will change because of your presence. Some members will accelerate, finding tools to carry practice into daily life. Others will drift away because the threshold of commitment proves too high. Treat both outcomes as truthful data. Invest resources in those who demonstrate the capacity to integrate practice responsibly and provide gentle regard to those who choose different paths. Your voice will be sought for guidance. When you teach, design experiences that prioritize testing over rhetoric. Provide small, verifiable exercises and build evaluation loops so learners can see the effect of practice on real circumstances. Champion humility in instruction and require accountability measures that prevent charismatic authority from becoming coercive. The material demands of expansion will surface. Budgeting attention, energy, and finances becomes necessary. Hire people who can hold details and maintain the quality of systems while you continue to steward the larger orientation. Delegation is not abandonment, it is a method by which complexity becomes manageable and sustainable. Prepare for scrutiny. Public presence invites critique, misunderstanding, and misrepresentation. Develop communication practices that clarify intent and correct misreading without becoming defensive. Keep a ledger of decisions and outcomes so that your reputation rests on documented practice rather than impression. Transparency with boundaries will allow trust to grow without sacrificing necessary discretion. Creativity will serve translation. Use multiple modalities to convey subtle teachings: sound, image, structured practice, and brief written guides. Design offerings that allow people to approach material gradually and to test assumptions through practice. Resist simplifications that strip nuance, and instead create layered entry points so curiosity can lead to deeper engagement. Sustainability requires pleasure. Protect sources of joy that refill your capacity and resist the myth that sacrifice is the only honorable path. Include play, art, and relational nourishment in operational planning. These elements are not indulgence, they are replenishment that makes a long trajectory viable. As alignment increases, expect moments that feel like orchestration rather than chance. Meetings will coalesce, timing will sharpen, and your access to resources may accelerate. Receive these moments with careful stewardship rather than triumphant consumption. Use alignment to fortify infrastructure, build resilience, and enable others to step into responsibility. Toward the end of this chapter, you will be offered an artifact that translates a portion of the transmission into moving form. It will appear at the center of your viewing frame, a short sequence that carries both image and tonal instruction. Consider this clip an active lesson rather than passive spectacle. Watch the interplay of sound and gesture and allow it to complete cycles that text leaves open. If the footage resonates, treat subscribing and enabling alerts as a commitment to practice rather than a habit of consumption. Doing so will ensure that future transmissions arrive when they matter and that you receive prompts to act when timing requires it. Frame this step as a practical subscription to a curriculum of refinement, one that supports ongoing engagement and accountability. This threshold is not an endpoint. It is a portal into a larger field of work that asks for steady hands, generous heart, and fierce patience. Carry forward the habits you have refined, protect the clarity you have earned, and let your presence continue to reconfigure what it touches. The world will bend around steady intention if you sustain the discipline to hold it. Practice with tenderness and rigor, let your effort remain a steady offering for all now.